a love left behind. It was a quiet afternoon. The sun was warm and the streets were busy. An old man sat on a bench in the park. His name was William. He watched the people passing by. Some walked fast, some laughed, and some held hands. William's hands rested on his cane. His eyes were full of memories. He had loved once, a long time ago. Her name was Maria. She had golden hair and a bright smile. They were young and dreamed of a happy life together. But life had other plans. Maria left the city and never came back. William waited, but she never returned. Years passed and he learned to live alone. He worked, read books, and walked in the park every day. One day, as he sat on the bench, he saw a familiar face. His heart skipped a beat. It was Maria. She looked older, but her smile was the same. She was with a man and 2 children. They looked happy. William felt something warm in his heart. He was not sad. He was happy for her. Life had given her joy, and that was enough. He smiled and looked at the sky. Some love stays forever, even when life moves on. William sat still on the bench, watching Maria from a distance. His hands tightened around his cane, but his face remained calm. Memories of the past rushed through his mind. He remembered their long walks by the river, the way she laughed at his silly jokes, and the way her eyes sparkled under the moonlight. Maria stood with her family near an ice cream stand. Her husband, a tall man with grey hair, held her hand. Their children, a boy and a girl, ran around, laughing and playing. William watched as Maria bent down to fix her daughter's hair. She looked happy. She looked loved. For a moment, William wondered what life would have been like if things had been different. Would he have been the one standing beside her? Would they have had children together? But he shook the thoughts away. Life had taken them on different paths, and that was okay. Maria suddenly turned her head. Her eyes met William's. For a second, she froze. Then recognition filled her face. She took a small step forward, her lips parting as if to speak. William's heart pounded. Should he smile? Should he wave? Or should he just walk away? The moment felt endless. The noise of the park faded. It was just the 2 of them, lost in time. But then Maria's son pulled at her arm, asking for his ice cream. She turned away, laughing again, and the moment was gone. William exhaled slowly. He had seen her happy. That was enough. He stood up, adjusted his coat, and walked away, blending into the crowd. William walked slowly through the park, his cane tapping against the pavement. The cool evening breeze touched his face, carrying the scent of fresh flowers. He thought about Maria, about the brief moment their eyes had met. It had been years, yet seeing her again had made it feel like yesterday. He found a quiet bench under an old oak tree and sat down. His heart felt heavy, but there was also peace. She was happy, and that was all he had ever wanted for her. Still, he could not stop the memories from coming back, the nights they had talked about the future, the promises they had made, the love they had shared. A young couple walked past him, holding hands and laughing. William smiled faintly. Love was beautiful, even when it did not last forever. He had learned that long ago. Some love stories do not end with happily ever after. Some simply become part of who you are, shaping you in ways you never expected. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir. May I sit here?" William looked up. A woman, probably in her 50s, stood before him, holding a book in her hands. He nodded, moving slightly to make space. She sat down, opening her book, but after a moment she glanced at him and smiled. "You look deep in thought," she said gently. William chuckled. "Just remembering an old story," he replied. She nodded as if she understood. "Sometimes old stories are the best ones," she said. William looked at her for a moment, then smiled. Maybe, just maybe, new stories could begin, even after the old ones had ended. William sat on the bench, listening to the quiet sounds of the park. The woman beside him turned the pages of her book, but she did not read. She simply held it, as if waiting for him to speak. After a long silence, he said, "I once loved someone here in this very park." His voice was calm, but there was sadness in his eyes. The woman looked at him with interest. "Did she love you too?" she asked gently. William nodded. "Yes, we were young. We dreamed of a future together, but life had other plans." He sighed, staring at the sky. "She married someone else. I never saw her again until today." The woman closed her book. "And how did it feel seeing her again after all these years?" William smiled softly. "Strange. She was happy. She had a family, and well, I had my memories." The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Memories are important, but they should not be the only thing we carry." William looked at her. "And what else should we carry?" She smiled. "Hope." For the first time in a long while, William felt something shift inside him. Maybe she was right. Maybe life was not just about the past, but also about what came next. William walked slowly through the park, his hands in his pockets. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. He thought about Maria and her family. He thought about the past. He sat on a different bench this time, away from where he had seen her. The park was quieter now. Children had gone home, and only a few people remained. A young couple walked by, laughing softly. They reminded him of himself and Maria, years ago. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. Life had moved forward for her, and for him? He wasn't sure. The woman from before, the one with the book, walked toward him. She carried a cup of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing it to him. William took the cup and nodded. "Thank you," he said. He hesitated, then added, "Why are you being kind to me?" She sat beside him. "Because you look like someone who needs a friend." William looked at her. There was warmth in her eyes, a kindness that felt familiar. The woman beside him did not say much, but her presence was comforting. The park was almost empty now. The streetlights began to glow, casting soft light on the path. For the first time in a long while, William did not feel invisible. Someone had noticed him. Someone had cared. He looked at the woman and smiled. "I never got your name," he said. She smiled back. "Eleanor," she said. "And you?" "William." Eleanor nodded. "Nice to meet you, William." They sat in silence again, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. William thought about Maria, about his past, about all the years he had spent alone. But tonight, for the first time, he felt that maybe the future held something new. Eleanor stood up. "It's getting late," she said. "Would you like to walk with me?" William hesitated, then stood as well. "Yes," he said softly. Side by side they walked down the quiet path. The night air was cool, but William felt warm inside. Perhaps his story was not over yet. Perhaps a new chapter was just beginning.